Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. So today is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disappearance day, and there's Srila Prabhupada's mentioned in our purports and instructions that we honor the appearance and disappearance day of our previous teachers. So today is one of those days. So appearance day is when they appear in this world, and then disappears when they disappear from this world. So we use that type of terminology if you're not used to it. So today I'll be briefly talking about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And before I begin, I would like to honor the spiritual masters by offering my prayers. Om Jnanatmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Sarasvati Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavati Vaishnavi. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who is very dear to Krishna, having taken shelter at His lotus feet. We offer our respectful obeisance unto you, O Master, servant of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. You're kindly spreading the message of Lord Chaitanya in the Western countries, which is full of voidism and impersonalism. Hare Krishna. So today I will read from Sri Brahma Samhita, which is one of the books that we distribute as part of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, but it's actually authored by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, not by Srila Prabhupada. So I wanted to give some importance to this wonderful text, because it was commented by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, as well as it's something that's based on wisdom and scripture based. Because usually when there's sometimes there's topical classes, I feel uncomfortable talking if there's no book that's based in it. So now that there's a book and I like to talk about it, then I feel more comfortable. So we'll speak from Sri Brahma Samhita, and what I'll do is I'll read from some excerpts, as well as the first, the invocation mantra, as well as its purport. So, and I'll also briefly talk about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's life. So here, thank you all for joining. Is anybody here for the first time here? Any first timers or newcomers? No? Okay. So thank you for coming today. It's quite a snowy day outside, and we made the effort to come, which is wonderful. So thank you for being here. And on a separate note, if on all days, you could decide to do anything or be anywhere, but you decide to come here, which is also glorious. So thank you all for being here. So I'll read from Sri Brahma Samhita, and I will read something from the introduction, and then we'll go on to the first verse. So the plan is we had our kirtan led by yourself. Your name? Vaishnavi. Okay, so led by Vaishnavi, and then since we've had that, we'll go into the class, and then a question and answer session after. So let's go into Sri Brahma Samhita introduction. The Brahma Samhita teaches that transcendence, truth, ultimate reality can be apprehended only by the mercy of the supreme transcendental entity, the absolute truth himself. And that perception of the ultimate reality is a function not of speculative reason, but of direct cognition through divine revelation. So as you can see, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's English is more complex than Srila Prabhupada's English. Srila Prabhupada's English was a little simple, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's English is more complex. So if you don't have a copy of Brahma Samhita, I would encourage you to take one. We have some available in the back. So the Brahma Samhita, the English is quite complex, which is why I recommend you have a dictionary with you when you read this book. It's one of the few books that I was like, you have to have a dictionary with you, because the words Srila Bhaktisiddhanta uses is very, very It's very British because he was there during the British time, and it's very complex. So I recommend have a dictionary when you read this book. So here we see from the first sentence itself, the introduction, where the Brahma Samhita talks about transcendence, truth, the ultimate reality, which is Sri Krishna himself, but it explains it in a very scholarly way. And the way we get this knowledge is not through speculative reasoning. The speculative reasoning is like how scientists, they discover something, they study it, they analyze it, hypothesize it, and come with some conclusions, do some experiments. So here it says by direct perception, which means that the knowledge is there, the wisdom is there, the absolute truth is there, and through divine revelation does this get propounded. So Brahma, the first created being, has this direct perception of the absolute truth through meditation and through penances, and through that, Lord Brahma has written composed the Brahma Samhita. So here you say the revelation is evolved through bhakti, pure selfless love of God. So that's kind of a definition of bhakti, is pure selfless love of God. Only by such spiritual devotion can Krishna be seen. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whom the pure devotees see in the heart of hearts, with the eye of devotion tinged with the salve of love. Right? So salve is like an ointment. So because one has pure love of Krishna, it's like having an ointment on your eyelids, and you're able to perceive Krishna in your life day to day. So here it says that only through bhakti, pure selfless love of God, can one know Krishna. Further, as our commentator explains, which is Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, the form of Krishna is visible to the eye of the pure spiritual self, in proportion to its purification by the practice of devotion. So here it says that as we are practicing devotional service, the more and more pure we get, the more and more advanced we go, the more we are able to perceive transcendence and spirituality, and in this case the absolute truth, the form of Sri Krishna. And here it's very interesting. Bhakti, as a state of consciousness, then is attained through bhakti as a practice, a discipline. So here we see that bhakti is a matter of spiritual practice and discipline. It's not just a mere summary of blind faith or faith that can be shaken. Bhakti is that which is very firm, unshaken, as well as it comes through practice and discipline. So when we explain to others in society, what do you practice? You can say, well, my spiritual practice is bhakti yoga. My spiritual practice is Krishna consciousness. Whether it's your co-workers, neighbors, and it's a practice. We have to constantly practice for this. It's a constant endeavor. It is selfless love, but it comes with discipline, because we are conditioned to so many things in our past lives. We have so many concoctions as to what's happiness. But through bhakti, through the wisdom literatures, we get to know who the absolute truth is, who we are, and what is our relation with everything, including the absolute truth. So here it says, bhakti is a state of consciousness. For then it's attained through bhakti as a practice and discipline. So Krishna consciousness can be attained when we yearn for this practice and discipline. For this reason, Lord Krishna, in his response to Brahma at the end of the text, summarizes the bhakti in 5 aphorisms. This devotional discipline goes far beyond conventional piety. This is another thing that's important. Conventional piety is, okay, well, I'll go to church and temple, I'll be there in front of the altar with my hands, palms folded, and I'll give a little donation, a little bit, listen to the sermon or class, and go back home to my regular life and do whatever I want. That's kind of conventional piety. But what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is trying to express, and especially in this introduction, the foreword, that Krishna consciousness is not a conventional piety, but it's actually a spiritual discipline. And there's a great difference between that. That's why we call ourselves Vaishnavas or Krishna conscious practitioners, Bhakti yogis. we don't want to be categorized with, some sort of conventional faith or conventional term, because it's not really conventional piety. It's not just you come here, you offer your obeisances and you go back. No. Practitioners of Krishna consciousness make sure they practice, after they leave here, so that they see Krishna not only in the temple but outside the temple. That's the first kind of beginning is, okay, we first recognize that there is God, the absolute truth in the temple, so we'll act nicely, behave nicely, be polite in front of the deity. But then when we go outside where we do something totally opposite to Krishna consciousness, we still haven't quite understood the deeper levels of that. So that's why the practice has to be consistent. Consistent practice outside the temple and inside the temple. I think that's very much needed. So this could be humility, being able to see everyone as a friend in relation to the Lord, seeing Krishna everywhere, whether Krishna, you see the moon, you can think, okay, that's Krishna's eyes, the sun, the moon, the pure air, the clean water, even the snow. This is Krishna in different forms. So similarly, we see that. So here, we see this is a devotional discipline that goes far beyond conventional piety. Then it says it necessitates constant endeavors for self-realization. And I think in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, it mentions that yoga is meant for self-purification. So we have to constantly endeavor. Just like how, when you're flying, the pilot has to make sure that, the engines are, the thrust is there so that you're constantly endeavoring and not losing altitude. So similarly, bhakti, we have to constantly be endeavoring, because the material energy, which is so strong, tends to bring us in lower in consciousness. So that's why we have to always kind of endeavor to always keep fighting that, because if we kind of go in cruise control or autopilot, we'll eventually just fall off, because the material energy is so strong it will try and bring us away from Krishna, which is kind of a test, we should say, and we should try and overcome those tests. And Krishna mentions that you can overcome those tests when you completely surrender unto Krishna. So I think there's a verse in the Gita that relates to that. And then it states that it necessitates constant endeavor for self-realization, involving both a turning from worldly sense gratificatory activities, as well as sincere absorption in spiritual practices and behavior under the guidance of authorized scripture. So here it says that we constantly endeavor for self-realization, and at the same time we kind of turn away from material activities. And when we turn away from material activities, we have to be absorbed in a spiritual practice. So when we are singing, when we are cooking, when we are chanting japa, when we are offering something, some offerings to the Lord, we have to have that absorption, complete absorption. So when we have absorption, we turn away from material energy, and we do so in a manner that is authorized by scripture or wisdom books like the Brahma Samhita, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction. There's so many wonderful Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures we have. So we use that as kind of a direction, because they are divinely given to us, so we take them as it is. So it says, through such practice, then the materialist is purified of his tendency towards philosophical negation and comes to understand a positive transcendence. So this essentially means that this whole notion that the opposite of spirituality is simply rejecting materialism is not what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Lord Chaitanya, our whole parampara had in mind. They have this idea of positive engagement, positive transcendence, which means that they're negating this notion that ultimately there's no form of the absolute and you don't have to do anything, just simply negate. But they see this as a fallacy because it denies the spiritual form of Sri Krishna, as well as it also, it just propagates nothingness, which is not entirely the truth, because we have Krishna coming here to the world, explaining the Bhagavad Gita, explaining that, fools deride me when I come in the human form. Avajantim mudaha. So that's the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 8. So here we have a positive engagement, that we are attracted to Krishna, we are attracted to the practices that relate to spirituality. This in turn helps us be away from materialism instead of simply negation. Simply negation means, okay, food is bad, I should eat less of it, this is bad, that is bad. So you kind of shun the world, but eventually you come to a point where you need to eat, you need to engage in the world a little bit, and you kind of fall down because you're like, okay, there's nothing else for me to be attracted to. Whereas when we get attracted to Krishna's holy name, the Mahamantra, Kirtan, Prasadam, wisdom, Krishna's stories, Krishna's philosophy, then we get attracted to something that's spiritual and it's positive because we engage in it, and by doing so, we negate ourselves from the negative material energy. So here it says that positive transcendence, through such practice, we can get ourselves purified. So that's just the introduction of Sri Brahma Samhita. Of course, it's quite long. And I will go on to speak from the verse today, which is text number 1. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta writes, prior to text 1, it was found necessary to publish this small book for the use of English-knowing people who are interested in the acme of transcendental truths in their manifested phases. The theme delineated in the text of this book is quite different from the ordinary heaps of poetic mundane literature, as they are confined to a limited aspiration of senses. The book was found in the south, in South India, some 4 centuries ago, and it's then again brought into light in the very same country after a long time, just like worshipping the goddess Ganges by offering her own water. And that's by Srila Siddhanta Sarasvati at Sri Gaudiya Mutt, Calcutta on the 1st of August 1932. So here Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says that he found it necessary to publish this book for the use of the English-knowing people, so that us living in the English-speaking world, we can understand this, and who are interested in the acme of transcendental truths. Does anybody know what acme means? Acme, A-C-M-E. Anybody? Okay, so let's look it up. So what is acme? Because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta has very wonderful English, and we want to know what it means. So A-C-M-E, let's see. So acme means the highest, from my understanding. Yeah, the highest point is acme. So highest point of transcendence, meaning that which is beyond the material world. What's the highest point? What's the highest point of spirituality? So here Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is saying that the highest point, so here it says that it was found necessary to publish a small book for the use of English-knowing people who are interested in the acme of transcendental truths in their manifested phases, which means the highest of all truths that are manifest, in front of us. So the themes delineated in the text of this book is quite different from the ordinary heaps of poetic mundane literature. So heap meaning, if you would take some grass and just keep piling it on, it forms a heap. So heaps of mundane literature means there's a lot, ordinary magazines, newspapers, these are all the heaps that are forming, or news on apps and so forth, websites. So these form kind of mundane literature, but what's better than that are books like this, which are, very much go beyond the range of our sense perception. Whereas everything else is within our sense perception or based on our senses. So here Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says that this was found in South India, which was in the Adikeshava temple. And once this was found, then we had a chapter that was taken from the Brahma Samhita, and it was carefully transported. So Lord Chaitanya was not allowed to take that very text from that temple. So he had to write it on scribes. Scribes is like, you can think of a book, but in a very ancient form, where it's on leaves and it's like written down. So he had to literally copy it word for word, bring it back, and then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was translated into English so that all of us who are in the English-speaking world and can understand it better. So we are indeed very grateful for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who made sure that this is accessible in the English-speaking world. So we'll go into text 1, which is Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is a supreme Godhead. He has an eternal blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. Purport. Krishna is the exalted supreme entity having his eternal name, eternal form, eternal attribution, and eternal pastimes. The very name Krishna implies his loving, attractive designation, expressing by his external nomenclature the acme of entity. So again, acme makes another. His eternal, beautiful, heavenly, beautiful, blue-tinged body, glowing with his intensity of ever-existing knowledge, has a flute in both of his hands. As his inconceivable spiritual energy is all extending, still he maintains his all-charming medium size by his qualifying spiritual instrumentals. His all-accommodating supreme subjectivity is nicely manifested in his eternal form. The concentrated all-time presence, uncovering knowledge, and inebriating felicity have their beauty in him. The mundane manifested portion of his own self is known as all-pervading Paramatma, Ishvara, Supreme Lord, or Vishnu, all-fostering. Hence it is evident that Krishna is sole Supreme Godhead. His unrivaled or unique spiritual body, or his super excellent charm, is eternally unveiled with innumerable spiritual instrumentals, senses, and unreckonable attributes, keeping their signifying location properly, adjusting at the same time by his inconceivable conciliative powers. This beautiful spiritual figure is identical with Krishna, and the spiritual entity of Krishna is identical with his own figure. So this means that Krishna's body is non-different from Krishna. For example, our material body is different from who we are. So we're the soul. The soul is covered by mind, intelligence, ego. That's the subtle body. And then the subtle body is then covered by the material body, which you have your hands, you have your senses, and so forth. So essentially, these are the three bodies that we are composed of. But in this case, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is making a statement that Satchitananda Vigraha, which is Krishna's body is non-different from Krishna. Right? So that's a concept that we have to understand, because sometimes the impersonalists, they say that, well, Krishna comes in this world and takes a material body. But that's why Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita, Avajanti ma mudaha, manushrim tanamashritam, param bhavamajanto mama bhuta maheshwara. Which is that fools or people who are not knowledgeable deride me when I come in my human form. They do not know my transcendental nature. Right? So Krishna is transcendental. He can do whatever he wants. He can appear whenever he wants, however he wants. So that's why Krishna appears in different forms. We have the 10 Leela avatars where he appears as a fish, appears as a boar, Narasimha Deva, and so forth. So here Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is making this point in his commentary that Krishna's body is not different from who Krishna is. So which is Satchitananda Vigraha, means his body doesn't diminish, just like our body is diminished. And Krishna's body is ever youthful, ever fresh, and that's the nature of spirit, is that which doesn't change. So then the purport goes on to explain that the very intensely blended entity of eternal presence, of felicitous cognition, is a charming, targeted, holding, or transcendental icon. It follows the conception of the indistinguishable formless magnitude, Brahman, which is an indolent, lax presentment of cognitive bliss, and merely a penumbra of intensely blended glow of these three concomitants, viz., the blissful, the substantive, and the cognitive. The transcendental manifestive icon Krishna, in its original face, is a primordial background of magnitudinal infinite Brahman and of the all-pervasive Oversoul. Krishna is truly envisioned with his variegated pastimes, which is the owner of transcendental cows, the chief of cowherds, consort of milkmaids, ruler of the terrestrial abode of Gokula, and the object of worship by transcendental residents of Gokula beauties is Govinda. He is the root cause of all causes, who are predominating and predominated agents of the universe. The glance of his projected fractional portion is the sacred originating water, viz. the personal oversoul or Paramatma, gives rise to a secondary nature, who creates this mundane universe. This oversoul intermediate energy brings forth the individual souls, analogously to the emanated rays of the sun. This book is a treatise of Krishna, so the preamble is enacted by chanting his name in the beginning. So I won't go into the deeper meanings of this purport, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a trailer as to how complex Bhaktisiddhanta's English and expression is of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I'll talk a little bit about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta appeared in 1874, and he was the very son of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who is two acharyas to the right of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So the son of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he remained a monk for the rest of his life, and he was a lifelong celibate. And he was a very scholarly person, very, very, as you can see, very scholarly person. He read many of his books. He has, I think he memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita when he was like 7 years old. It was just simply amazing. But something interesting about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is the guru, which is Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji, was illiterate. So this is very interesting. It's like he's very well read. As you can see, his English is very complex, but his own guru does not know how to read and write. Because it's not about how educated you are, it's about how advanced you are in your spiritual practice and bhakti. So it doesn't matter whether you're illiterate or very learned like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, everyone can be a respected person in Krishna consciousness bhakti yoga. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta took initiation from Srila Gaurkishore Das Babaji, and here we see that something that's they may be two very opposite personalities, but in bhakti they're very much aligned. Another thing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted to do was make Krishna consciousness very accessible. So he founded the Gaudiya Math, which is these monasteries, 64 monasteries across India, through the north, west, south, and east, where he wanted to have all these monasteries established where people can come and practice Krishna consciousness. Then in 1933, he actually met Prabhupada. Prabhupada met him, I should say, in 1922 at the Altadanga Math, which is this monastery in Bengal, where it was very simple worship, focusing on literature, reading, sharing the wisdom. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was very proud of people who shared the wisdom, and he made sure that this is something very revolutionary, that the printing press was as important as deity worship. And in one of the temples, you can see they have like an altar like this, but beside the altar they have like a printing press, because the printing press propagates this wisdom across so many villages, so many towns, so many countries, that he wanted to show that the deity and the printing press are non-different, because here you have the personified form of Krishna, and here you have Krishna in the form of a book. So in his emblem, you will see that there will be, of the Gaudiya Math, you will see that there is going to be a mridanga, there's going to be like a printing press, and then there's going to be like Lord Chaitanya. So it's very interesting that way that he had that close together. And he called the printing press like a brihat mridanga, meaning a big mridanga, like big mridanga drum, because whenever the printing press prints books, it makes kind of a repetitive noise. So that's why he called it the big mridanga. So so Srila Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and Srila Prabhupada was very much, in awe of him and wanted to learn more and always be there. And since Srila Bhaktisiddhanta saw that quality of Srila Prabhupada, where he would sit there and listen, he kind of marked Srila Prabhupada and said that, okay, I want you to express this Krishna consciousness in the English-speaking world. So that's why Srila Prabhupada came to the West based on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's order. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta he did want to make Krishna consciousness accessible and towards all kinds of people. So for the British, what he would do was he would present himself in a manner that would make people in society take him seriously. And the way you would see this is he would wear his, he would wear his dhoti, but he will have a turban. On top of his turban, he would adopt this type of kurta, and then he would wear like a coat over that. So he would wear a coat over that, and he would go in a car, which was very unconventional for monks because renunciate sannyasis would never go in a car. So he went into like a luxury car, and he would go to the Britishers, and he would invite the Britishers over, and he would have his disciples wear pants and vests and shirts so that to welcome the British dignitaries over and to explain Krishna consciousness, what that's about. He was also so modern in the sense, even though he was a very strict acharya or spiritual teacher, in terms of presenting things, he was very contemporary. Like for example, if there were laborers building the temple and they were so addicted to smoking, he himself would roll the bidis, right? And these are things that we really can't think of. In 1933, he did send 2 sannyasi monks to England because at that time, the British Empire was very, prominent in India, and the UK was seen as, the pinnacle of all places to go. So he sent 2 monks there to spread Krishna consciousness in that area. And he mentions that, well, if you need to attract the Britishers with the local cuisine, make sure you do that as well, which is also quite revolutionary. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was quite a revolutionary person, and he definitely wanted wisdom to spread all across the world because he saw there was a lot of ignorance, wars, people are fighting over one another, and through wisdom we can have this spiritual community and communion. And Srila Prabhupada took that mission and went and came to America in 1965, which was quite many years after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta disappeared, which was in 1937. So Srila Prabhupada took that mission, and he wanted to be able to write all these books in English so that they're accessible, and that's only because of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's kind of vision that he had. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is very revolutionary that way, and he definitely he was also against the caste system, which surprises very many people, but in our tradition, we're strictly against the caste system because that's based on birth, whereas we follow that which is based on quality and activity. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was very much against that, and the local caste Brahmins were not very happy with him. But he, through scholarly argument, was able to prove that one who is not born in a Brahmin family or a high priestly order can still take to being a priest as long as their qualities and activities are proven to be aligned with that order. So we owe Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur a great, immense deal of gratitude. It's because of him that we're able to have kind of the modern Krishna consciousness practices. And he focused on wisdom, and he focused on books. And one time there was a temple which was made out of marble in Bagh Bazaar. And that temple was being built, and all the monks who were under Bhaktisiddhanta's order were thinking that, oh, I want this room, I want that room, this is mine, this is mine. And when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta saw his own disciples fighting like this, he said that, sell the marble and print books. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was so much into books that he said that, I don't care about all these monks who want this nice rooms and this and that. Sell the temple, sell the marble, and just print books. And he told Srila Prabhupada, if you ever get money, print books. And he had that conversation in Radhakund where, everyone was kind of scattered everywhere, but Srila Prabhupada sat there and was listening to him. So it was a divine mission of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and then Srila Prabhupada took that to heart, And whenever we have these Rath Yatra festivals, when we had the Rath Yatra festival in New York, Srila Prabhupada offered his obeisances in front of the Jagannath cart, and then he mentioned that all glories to my spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So Srila Prabhupada really took Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's words to heart and took it overseas. And Srila Prabhupada came to New York instead of London because he saw, okay, well, America's getting more and more prominent in the world. So he came to New York City and he was able to spread the divine mission. And when we chant Srila Prabhupada's pranam mantra, which is Namaste Saraswati Deve, so Saraswati is attributing to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So Saraswati is Goddess Saraswati, but Saraswati is that which belongs to Saraswati. So you give it the name Saraswati because you're usually very scholarly or learned, so that's why we have Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, but Saraswati Devi is that which belongs to Saraswati. Just like we have Hara and Hare. So we chant Hare because that which belongs to Hara. So that's why we say the A. Yeah. So Hare and versus Hara. So Hara is attributing to the feminine aspect of divine Srimati Radharani. So we say Hare because that which belongs to Hara. Similarly, Saraswati Devi is that which belongs to Saraswati. So it's Saraswati Thakur's mission was very dear to Srila Prabhupada. That's why Srila Prabhupada has that in his pranama, that Saraswati Devi Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarani. So in this world where the divine is given no attributes or no form, Srila Prabhupada very much wanted that we have that positive transcendence. Krishna is there in his form. We can be there to worship him through mantras, through practices, through offerings, through daily engagements. So that's why in his book it's mentioned that Krishna consciousness is not a mere matter of conventional piety, but it's a spiritual discipline and practice. So hopefully if you have any take-home messages, is to know that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted us to very much benefit from these literatures, these practices, coming and gathering together. It's really important to do to really uncover ourselves and our true nature. So, Hare Krishna. So, questions and comments on anything I spoke or anything on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur or Srila Prabhupada that I can answer. I don't know the answer to all the questions, but but hopefully if there's anything that stood out to you, maybe I can speak. So, questions, comments, or reflections? Yes? You can come a little forward and speak, yeah?
Basic question.
Yes. Yes.
Adikeshwar temple has been there, it's not a very huge temple. It's not too big.
Yeah.
My question is, Sri Sampradaya Ramanujan came 1000 years back. So Adikeshwar temple is Sri Vaishnava temple.
I believe so, yeah.
How come this was revealed just 500 years back? What was happening in this temple? It was not there in the temple. It's a very old temple.
Yeah, so the question is, the Adikeshwar temple, which is in South India, was, the Brahma Samhita was discovered in that temple. How come it wasn't discovered by other practitioners of other sampradayas? Good question. So my only response to this is, various temples, ancient temples that you have in South India, they tend to have a lot of manuscripts and a lot of treasures that are not really revealed or discovered. I think the Ananta Padmanabha Swami temple has that. I'm sure many temples have some sort of, texts that are lying there or treasures that are there. So what happens is, in the Sri Sampradaya, they have a certain spiritual discipline, right? So their spiritual discipline is to follow their spiritual teachers who propagated, say, the Vishnu Purana, Bhagavata Purana, as well as the Bhagavad Gita, as well as the Divya Prabandhams and the poetry from the Alvar saints. So for them, the Brahma Samhita was, may not take as much of a precedent. At the same time, in terms of discovering the Brahma Samhita, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he visited South India, he went to this temple and he was able to, since he is Krishna himself, there's a transcendental mysticism to it, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu discovers it, but the temple authorities are like, well, you can't take this with you. So that's why Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had to copy it word for word and take it with him, because in our sampradaya, in our tradition, our spiritual tradition, we honor Lord Krishna, especially that which gives Lord Krishna the most glory and prominence. Because Lord Brahma comes in our sampradaya, whereas with the Sri Sampradaya it's Lakshmi. So since Brahma is in our sampradaya, he's the chief of our sampradaya, and we see in this book Brahma Samhita, Krishna is giving Lord Brahma the knowledge, and Lord Brahma has the Vedas in his hands. So we come in that sampradaya. So Lord Chaitanya, who's also part of this sampradaya, the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya, he wanted to get this text from Brahma, who was the first created being, who knows about Krishna and can glorify Krishna, because he was the first to really perceive that there's someone who is greater than himself, right? So he wanted to know Krishna that way. So, we specifically worship Krishna because Krishna is very lovable. Whereas with the Narayana form, it's just awe and reverence. There's the Swami, the God, and here I am the servant, and that's it. The servant-master relationship. In the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we go beyond that master-servant relationship to, there's obviously the friendship with Arjuna and Krishna, and then beyond that there's the parenthood, and beyond that that's pure love of Krishna. So we follow the gopis in Vrindavan, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, specifically Srimati Radharani. So actually Gaudiya means Radharani. We actually worship Radharani in our tradition. So Srimati Radharani is very important. That's why on our altar we will never have Krishna by himself. There's in other sampradayas, they'll have Krishna by himself. But we have Radharani and Krishna, the feminine aspect and Krishna himself. So Radharani is very important to us, because it's only through Srimati Radharani's grace that we can really go to Krishna. So that's why in our tradition, the Brahma Samhita was uncovered, because it talks about the glories of Govinda, Krishna, and talks about the Radharani and the gopis in the spiritual world. So that's why it was very important and instrumental to us to be able to share this with the rest of the world. So that's why Lord Chaitanya went there, and it was more important to us than it was to them. Good question. Any other questions on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur? Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Yes.
Actually, I don't know anything. Like, I'm just being confused. Prabhupada has one like ISCON, and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has other
Gaudiya Math.
Gaudiya Math.
Yeah.
Why? Because Prabhupada and his guru is right? But why is different?
Good question. So the question is, we have Srila Prabhupada who has ISCON, and then we have Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur who founded the Gaudiya Math. So why do we have two different institutions or two different organizations? So Srila Prabhupada very much, when he came to New York, he wanted to have the Gaudiya Math have its embassy or its place in the United States and Canada and all around the world. But at that time, when Srila Prabhupada came, he didn't really get the help that he thought he really could receive from his godbrothers. So he mentioned that, could you send over some funds so that I can have a center, or there's people interested in Krishna consciousness in New York, can you help us? And none of his godbrothers were really cooperative to the extent that Srila Prabhupada wanted. So Srila Prabhupada, instead of having, and I know they sent maybe a mridanga and a kartal, but it wasn't really enough help because Srila Prabhupada had to struggle by himself alone in New York City in the winters, which is why we are so indebted to him, because he basically, had help only from, the locals, the hippies, and, the people working there. So he never really had much help. And he said that in 1966, I formed the International Society of Krishna Consciousness because the Gaudiya Math, they were not very much interested in spreading the message outside of India, apart from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's order in 1933 when those monks went to London. They were simply not as enthusiastic about it, and it's very difficult to be able to share a message in a very completely foreign land. So it's understandable that people in India felt like this is not something that would be very successful. So Srila Prabhupada wanted to have something that is not as, it doesn't take as much time to, make decisions and so forth. So he wanted to form the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, which is primarily focused outside of India. And that's why it kind of formed that way. So the Gaudiya Math, the practices that we follow are very similar in the same tradition. And you have to look at it as a tree. So there's a tree with many various branches, right? So within those, so we come under the Prabhupada branch. And there's, there's different gurus and so forth, but our branch is primarily focused on practicing Krishna consciousness, but in a manner that's quite simple and accessible to us. Because the Gaudiya Math might follow different practices as well, and which is fine. But in the West, some of those practices are not always practical. So that's why Srila Prabhupada wanted to have that instead of trying to, he didn't want his god brothers to be on board and have the Gaudiya Math overseas, but they were not as cooperative to kind of get behind that, and time was running short because he didn't want to get back and forth with them. So he founded the ISCKON after that. Yeah. So ISCKON can be considered to be like a branch of the same Gaudiya tree.
So they are doing same Gaudiya Math,
Yeah, so
same thing like ISKCON.
Yeah, the Gaudiya Math will be very similar to what we do. They'll chant Hare Krishna, they'll wear tilak, they'll wear kanchi mala, they'll practice the same festivals as we do. They'll honor Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but their focus on preaching might not be as much as what we are sharing. It's kind of like, we're in a monastery, we do our own thing, if you come, that's great, but it's not as much revolutionizing Krishna consciousness to the point where we make it accessible to other audiences. Because they may be like, oh, well, we follow Hari Bhakti Vilas, where, we follow Chaturmasya very strictly, and we don't eat carrots, things like that. It's just, those are things that we can't really follow here in the West. So Srila Prabhupada made it simple, and he wanted to kind of cut through that, kind of that resistance where initially no one was really inclined from the Gaudiya Math to really go out after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta left. So Srila Prabhupada went out and did that. So he initially wanted that help, but since it wasn't there, he said, okay, well, I'm going to have my new disciples here helping me, and I'll found this International Society for Krishna Consciousness, where he would have this, decision making will be more, instead of singular, it'll be more through a body, which wasn't followed when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta left. So he thought, okay, well, I want to do it the way Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted it to be.
Yeah, because I went to the Gaudiya Math place.
Yeah.
They are also doing Krishna's.
Yes.
I don't know, Prabhu. I just said Hare Krishna, Prabhu,
Yeah.
and then he got mad because he's kind of monk,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I'm following
Yeah,
that
this-
path, and he when I said Hare Krishna, Prabhu, how are you? And then he got so mad. He said, why you are telling me, Prabhu? And then I got confused because I just came from material thing.
Yeah,
I'm just practicing. I
I
don't
think,
know.
yeah,
And I got so confused. I said, oh my God, because Vaishnava, I cannot do aparadh, right?
my response to that is like, don't take it the wrong way, and don't base your, don't paint everybody with the same brush. So if you had one negative experience, doesn't mean all of them are like that. But at the same time, you have to understand that the way we practice in ISKCON, there's some adjustments towards the modern age and to Western, society. right? So we do that so that we make it accessible, and all of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, he had 5,000 of them, all of them have that type of mood that we want to make it accessible to others. So to sometimes, we have to tolerate the fact that a person may come to the temple, may not know the etiquette, but we tend to be very compassionate towards that instead of trying to try and scare them away. And in terms of all these terminologies we may use, like we try to make sure that we are as accessible and inclusive of everyone. So the mode's a bit different. So anyways, it's noon, and that's the end of the class.